Hi, and welcome to the Forbidden Films podcast. I'm Wayne Kramer. I'm a writer and director.
And I'm Barry Germansky, a film producer. This is a new podcast about the movies they won't make anymore.
Today, it's time to put on your dancing shoes because we're going to take a deep dive on Saturday Night Fever, a film that came out in 1977. And I saw it in South Africa, probably in 78 maybe, but they only showed the re-edited version of Saturday Night Fever, the one that was rated PG in the
Oh, wow.
US. And I had no idea that there existed a very raunchy, profane R-rated version.
Oh, so you got a
And
really different experience.
I did, but the funny thing is, I still enjoyed the version I did see. I thought it was a really good movie. The music was unbelievable, and to this day still remains maybe one of the best song soundtracks of all time. And the movie was very popular in South Africa. But then maybe 3 or 4 years later, I was working in a video store in South Africa, and video stores at that time were mostly bootleg tapes because the video market hadn't really come to South Africa, but people were recording movies off television in the UK. So we had Saturday Night Fever in the store, and I remember saying, "Yeah, I like this movie. I think I'm going to go watch it again." And suddenly, I'm watching the R-rated version, and it's a completely different movie. I can't believe the amount of profanity in the movie and the raunchiness of the movie and the sexuality that hadn't been in there before. Because even in the PG version, you don't have the woman dancing naked on the bar in the
So how
pub.
much would you say was cut out?
Well, apparently, just going by the cuts, they say there was maybe between 7 and 8 minutes cut, but I don't think they're talking about the language because I think what happened was they redubbed a lot of the language. So it wasn't like every time Travolta said fuck or they said something more extreme. I think, like they do with movies that they make a television cut for, and I think the original actors may have substituted some of the lines, I think. But the vibe and the feel of the movie are like two completely different movies. And I was so taken aback by it. And I had liked the movie the first time, but I loved it seeing what the original authentic flavor of this film was.
Yes.
And it was quite shocking to me because I also have to imagine in America at that time that the movie was seen as quite raw. There's language and there's racial slurs in it, and there's a ton of stuff in that film that would shock somebody who thought they were going to see a fun disco movie.
That's right.
And I also think, I mean, there's a liberal use of even the word cunt from John Travolta in the movie, which at that time in American film, you barely heard that word mentioned. I think you barely hear it today, but it's all over British movies, but they say it in a very non-sexual term.
Yes.
But it was quite shocking, and the movie had a different kind of edge than watching the PG version. And I was quite angry knowing that what I had seen was a PG version. The fact that such a good movie had to be reduced to that just for financial reasons. And I understand why that ended up happening, why it happened in the States, because the music and the soundtrack was so popular that underage kids were getting in to see the movie and the parents or having their parents take them. And there was a lot of disapproval, but they wanted to enjoy the music and they wanted to see the great Travolta dance moves. And I guess they felt if they catered to a more PG audience with the film, they could make a lot more money. And I think they initially did when they brought it out as a re-release film.
And
But
so
if
how old
I
were you when you saw the PG version, and how old were you when you saw the R-rated version?
Let's see. So Saturday Night Fever came out in 77. So I must have been 12 when I saw the PG version. And then I was probably 15 or 16 when I saw the R-rated version, which never had any official release in South Africa. I imagine today, because after apartheid, they did away with the heavy censorship laws. So I imagine you can see the uncut version today in South Africa. But it must have taken many, many years before that version ever showed up there.
Wow. Well, when I first saw Saturday Night Fever, it was the R-rated version, and I was only in my single digits, and I saw it around the same time that I saw The Graduate. So this was in the 1990s. And one thing that struck me about both movies is that they have a sort of sexual disillusionment, which, of course, when you're that young, you don't know how to categorize what you're experiencing. But the point is, they show the sort of downside to living a hedonistic lifestyle, while, of course, alternately celebrating that type of lifestyle. And Saturday Night Fever is one of the most erotically expressionistic movies ever made. It's a perfect mishmash of sights and sounds that are oozing sexuality, I guess you could say. It's an unabashed movie in that respect. And it's very interesting to consider that basically it was a time capsule of the sexual revolution, at its peak. And then very quickly after that time, so let's say by 1980, with the rise of all kinds of STDs, in particular AIDS, that kind of lifestyle was no longer glamorized and it started to dissipate from society, from at least what I've read. So I don't know if you can speak to any of that. Like, what did you think about the lifestyle as it was portrayed in that film? Did it correspond to the life that you were living? What did you make of all of that?
I mean, as someone living in South Africa, seeing that kind of lifestyle in American movies, I remember being very envious. I always thought from afar America was this very free society,
Yes.
and people didn't have as much sexual hangups as they did in South Africa because everything was censored in South Africa and everything was sort of mandated by like the Dutch Reformed Church. And people were just a lot more straight-laced there. But especially seeing the uncut Saturday Night Fever, it just seemed like it was a lot more fun to live in America. But clearly, that was just from a 15, 16-year-old's point of view
Yes.
through the prism of American movies. It's interesting because what we're seeing in Saturday Night Fever is a very much a working class neighborhood. A lot of Saturday Night Fever measures the bridge and tunnel rivalry, so to speak. So like Brooklyn it was a working class neighborhood, but there were a lot of people living there who aspired to cross the bridge and remake their lives in Manhattan. That seemed wealthy and rich and cool and more on the cutting edge. And the film really highlights that with the two lead characters, Tony Manero and Stephanie, who by the end of the movie, Tony realizes that he wants to get out, that he wants to, in his mind, his friends are keeping him down. He's been exposed to Stephanie, who seems like she's leading this very artistic life where she's meeting all
Cosmopolitan.
the, yeah, cosmopolitan. There you go. Where she's meeting all these celebrities, and it seems like a whole other world from his life in Brooklyn with his religiously dominated household, where everything feels suffocating to him and very compressed. And then all these ambitions, or it seems like a whole different world across the bridge. And what he doesn't realize is that Stephanie is as provincial as him, really.
That's right.
Is that she's completely intimidated by that world. She's only 20 in the movie, which is shocking, the character's age. And she's struggling. She's struggling. She feels like an imposter, although whenever she's around Travolta and his friends, she's lauding it over them, saying, look how cultured I am. So even though I was watching it, while as a person watching in South Africa, I even thought like the Brooklyn part of it was cool. I thought you went to this disco and everybody seemed so forward there. I mean, one of the things about Saturday Night Fever that strikes me today, they would definitely not make Saturday Night Fever in the same way for many reasons.
That's for sure.
There's a lot of, let's say, homophobic dialogue. There's a lot of racial slurs. The guys themselves treat women like garbage, like sex objects. None of them in the film are having any kind of meaningful relationship with these the girls, to the degree that after they have sex with them in the back seat, one of the characters, I think it was it Double J, right after he comes, he says to the girl, what did you say her name was? And
Yeah.
there's they're popping pills in the club, they're drinking, they're only 19 apparently in this by Travolta's admission, if that's even accurate. And
Well, that's what he said. Yeah.
yeah, so like you said, it is kind of a very hedonistic lifestyle, but their lives beyond that are meaningless to them,
That's right.
because all it is waiting for, they're all doing crappy jobs if some of them are employed at all, and they're all waiting to go and blow it on Saturday night at the nightclub. So they spend their the entire week's salary on getting into the club, drinks, taking the women out, or buying drinks for them, getting laid.
Or trying
Um,
to get laid.
yeah, although they seem pretty successful
Yeah,
at
they
it.
do. Yeah. But here's the thing. This is a perfect time capsule of pre-AIDS culture in America because, like I said, very quickly that would come to an end. Studio 54 got shut down for other reasons because the guys who owned it were crooks.
Yeah.
But either way, that kind of lifestyle as depicted in Saturday Night Fever was not going to last long. And what's very interesting is that when you look at other ultra permissive time periods, like let's say the Weimar Republic, which is, shown in the movie Cabaret, that kind of society, that kind of culture burns itself out relatively quickly. And in both cases, the Weimar Republic and the tail end of the sexual revolution, the sexually transmitted diseases played a part in the and bringing an end to the respective cultures and societies, at least as what they were in their most hedonistic forms. So I find that very interesting.
I just wanted to mention because you talk about sexually transmitted diseases. The movie does show that they do use condoms.
That's right.
And Travolta, when he finds out that the Annette character, when he's about to make love to her, or he is already making, I can't
Yeah,
even
he
tell
checks
for sure
out.
in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, oh, he's very clear that he's not gonna impregnate any woman and be on the hook for that. And then
Friend.
later on, when Annette turns up at the dance studio, she shows him the handful of like Trojan condoms, apparently, which was a big advertising get for Trojan. That I think John Badham commented they sent him a lifetime's worth of condoms for that.
Oh, wow.
And he gave them to somebody because he claimed he didn't have a need for it. Uh, Product placement condoms. But so yeah, even though the sex seems, very easy to attain, if you were part of Tony Manero and his gang, because those guys were seen as the cool people in the club. So
That's
the
right.
women seemed to be throwing themselves at them. And of course, John Travolta was a super handsome guy with these great moves on the dance floor. So you
Yep.
could see how he would appeal to the women going to that club. And I love it's almost like it's a little role, but it's almost like a cameo as Fran Drescher plays that character Connie,
It's a great
who
moment.
it is a great moment, and she's gorgeous in the film. And the way she feels like she's Travolta's equal in that world when she comes up to him and says, "Are you as good in bed as you are on the dance floor?"
Yeah.
And
And
then
he
he
doesn't get
like,
along with her though.
well, but he's such a because he's a narcissist.
Yeah, of course.
He's such
Yeah.
a narcissist. He goes out and right away he's looking at her as like, am I going to sleep with this woman? It's not like, do I appreciate you dancing? And she wants to dance with him. She wants to also be in the spotlight with him. So the music changes where he goes, oh, fuck you. I'm going to go do my solo dance now. He treats her like absolute shit. And
Yes.
she was there for the taking. She was totally coming on to him. So that's kind of, these guys had a smorgasbord of any woman in their club who would sleep with him, except ironically, the Annette character who started out having some standards, right?
That's right.
She didn't just want to be another woman in Travolta's life, and she was playing hard to get. And in that world, the punishment for playing hard to get is you end up being sexually assaulted in the back seat of a car.
And that probably wouldn't be depicted today, even though, by the way, such things happen all the time and always have
Yeah.
happened, right, in one way or another. So, what I also appreciate about this movie is that it's unafraid of getting its hands dirty in
Oh
more than
yeah.
one way.
I wanted to mention quickly because before I lose the thought,
Yes,
the scene where Annette is, she's been taking drugs and she's drinking, and and Travolta has sort of rejected her, so she's now in the back seat of the car, and she is too fucked up to give consent, but she's basically having sex with, I think it's Joey, and she's kind of in the moment there, and then she sort of wakes up mid thrust or whatever, and she realizes, wait a minute, I'm with this guy, and she starts to regret it. It reminded me a little bit of the rape scene in Straw Dogs, where Suzanne George starts out like her former lover grabs her, and he starts sort of forcing her into sex, but there's a moment where she's almost enjoying it, and then he swaps himself out for his buddy. When Joey's done with her, he hands her over to Double J, and at that point, she's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be doing this. And then he's ignoring her. And it then comes on a full on rape scene. So, yeah, the tone of that, the tone of the movie, more than anything, I just don't see them making today because it would offend so many people. And that's what I admire about the movie. It's rawness, it's
Yes.
grittiness. It's you think you're going to watch a movie about disco dancing and it turns into be like this portrait of this troubled, restless youth in Brooklyn who fancy themselves as tough guys. They definitely are not educated. They don't respect education. Travolta's character tells Stephanie when they go out for coffee, she says, "Did you ever think about going to college?" And he goes, "No, why?" So it's a fascinating portrait of that group of people. And the movie was based on a screenplay by Norman Wexler, who adapted, I believe it was a magazine article.
That was largely fabricated.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Basically, the guy who wrote the article
Oh,
didn't
that's right, Nick
understand
Kahn. Nick Kahn.
his assignment. Yeah, he didn't basically
Yeah,
understand the culture that he was supposed to
yeah.
report on, so he fabricated a lot of it, and he basically was turning it into a rite of passage
But
article.
he was using the mods and the rockers. He knew some guy who was either a mod or a rocker from the UK as the template for Tony Manero, and he made the whole thing up. But a lot of people feel like it was very accurately made up, so to speak.
Well, I'm sure there are many examples of people who are in the same position, not just then, but now and always. There are many young people who go through the same kind of coming of age experience that Tony goes through. They could be a football player, they could be, just a cool kid in school. It doesn't really matter what their role is or what they do that sets them apart from other people, but they'll find themselves in a similar situation. So that's one of the things that makes the movie timeless because Tony has to basically navigate his path to adulthood and figure out who he is and what he actually values. And I think it's also a testament to the richness of this film that his character isn't one note.
Yeah,
He's a three-dimensional character, fully fleshed out, and he has negative aspects and he has positive aspects. He's not just this, saint, although there is some of that in him at times.
well, he's definitely a narcissist.
Yeah, he
You know,
alternates.
yeah, I like to say he's a narcissist with a pretty good heart. So he's very much about looking in the mirror and preening and getting the hair right and picking the right clothes and the look and putting on this persona of the face, of the
That's right.
nightclub. They call themselves "We're the Faces." But then he does feel for like Stephanie when she starts to reveal herself some more. He feels for her predicament. He feels bad about his mother, and when Frank Jr. leaves the priesthood. There's a vulnerability about him that, as much as he puts forward an aggressive front, it definitely leaks through. Even to the point where the gang, their friend is beaten up. They want to avenge. They care about each other. That they want to avenge them. But then it fluctuates between him being a complete douchebag at times.
But that's what makes him a
Yeah,
complex character. He's not just a
yeah.
one-dimensional cipher. And to be honest with you, that's another thing that makes this movie very not just highly original, but it wouldn't be made today because most likely today the character of Tony would be one-dimensional. He wouldn't have all these different sides to him, especially the side that he shows toward his brother, where he actually cares about him and is looking out for his well-being.
But it's a multi-pronged, the way he feels about his brother. He cares deeply about his brother, but he's also quite thrilled that his brother has left the priesthood, so that the brother is now on equal footing for the disdain of his family, because he feels like the brother is looked upon as this angelic person in the family, and he's the piece of shit. And once the brother leaves the priesthood, there's a part of him that's quite happy about the fact that now the brother can be a piece of shit to the family too.
Yeah, there is some of that. But again, that just makes him even more complex. This is a real character here. It's not a cipher or a cardboard cutout of a human being. And by the way, the sophistication with which his character is rendered is completely at odds with this type of movie, generally speaking, meaning we don't expect in a movie of this kind. Because, for example, a similar movie would be Flashdance or any number of
Right.
other movies where, it's just almost like a music video masquerading as a feature film.
In a way, I think the most I shouldn't even say it's a contemporary movie because it's probably 25 years old or more at least. But the movie that resembles it the most, which came after Saturday Night Fever, was Boogie Nights.
Yes, it's an
And I feel
homage
like
to Saturday Night Fever in many ways.
it feels very much. The Mark Wahlberg character feels very much like Tony Manero, somebody who's leaving behind he's dysfunctional family, who's seeking a new tribe of people, who wants to be better than he is. I mean, there's obviously the exploration of the porn industry at the time, and it's very different. But even the way it starts in the nightclub feels very much like that scene could have been plucked out of Saturday Night Fever. Way
And
the
Silver Linings
just that,
Playbook also borrows heavily from Saturday Night
yeah,
Fever, including the dance contest scene.
yeah. I was going to say about Saturday Night Fever, it was also one of the early uses of the Steadicam. I think it came pretty soon after Rocky. And the way the camera travels across the dance floor, like the following the characters or in and among the dancers, that was pretty innovative for the time.
And it's
And
extremely well done. I think that it's a perfect marriage. This movie represents a perfect marriage of sight and sound.
yeah,
The rhythms of the movie, both, and by the way, this is both in terms of the music and the editing, are unique. There's no other film that quite resembles this one
well, this
in that
the
regard.
soundtrack coming in and out, along with the transitions to different scenes, is so effective.
Yes.
What's interesting I read is that they didn't have the Bee Gees songs until they were in post production. So a lot of those numbers where you hear the Bee Gees songs on, they were dancing to like Boss Skaggs and other people. And in fact, I read that they wanted the Boss Skaggs song for the song that Tony and Stephanie practiced together to. And Boz Scaggs' label refused to give them the rights to it because they had licensed it to a movie that came out this year that's very similar to Saturday Night Fever, but from a female point of view, which was Looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Yes.
I think it was the song Lowdown, if I'm getting the right song. And apparently, Boz Scaggs lost out about $5 million on profit participation or residuals or whatever you call it in the music industry.
This movie represents a new cinematic rhythm in more than one way. It's got a beat to it. I mean, obviously the music has a great deal to do with that, but it's not just the music, the editing, the camera work that gets in the faces of the actors,
Yeah.
puts you really up close and personal with them. And
At times, it almost follows a very old-fashioned template where everybody on the dance floor at one point gets together, all the lead characters, like you would see in a 50s or 60s musical, where they're
yeah,
all like they're doing the perfectly synchronized dancing to the same song, and it's like bring out all the lead characters. It's quite funny. It becomes quite a sweet moment in the film that's otherwise like pretty barbed, as far as tone.
yes,
Um, but yeah, stylistically, I think John Badham did a great job with the film because it's not over stylized. It still feels gritty and grounded, but it definitely has like a great flow to the film. And I've watched this film. I've seen it at least maybe 20 times over my life since it came out. It never feels boring to me ever. It never
I
it's got
agree.
great pacing and it's not a short film. It's around 2 hours or a little over or just a little under 2 hours. And there's a director's cut out there that I have seen, but I don't feel like the additional scenes add anything to the film. I think I prefer the theatrical cut.
And
I
and
don't
what's
even
also
know.
interesting
Yeah.
is it's a perfect marriage between raw, gritty 70s sensibilities and this new form of disco expressionism, if you want to call it that. So compared to, for example, The French Connection, which is another great 70s movie with a lot of grit, this is just completely in its own category. Right, Serpico, The French Connection. There are multiple films that are gritty. By the way, Norman Wexler co-wrote Serpico, so he's a great 70s screenwriter. But this one, because of the disco element, really stands out aesthetically. It's not purely a raw, gritty film, because the disco music and the disco ball and the psychedelic lights, all of that combined to form something totally different. At least that's how I see it. And at the time, it must have really stood out because what else was there to compare with it?
You know what's
Um,
interesting is that the disco movement, apparently by the time Saturday Night Fever was being made or came out, was on the decline. It was actually like it was a fad that was people weren't paying that much attention to it. And then Saturday Night Fever comes out and totally reinvigorates it for another couple of years.
well, that's
And
interesting.
yeah, and the soundtrack, I think up until I'm trying to remember when movie bumped it off the charts, but it was the number one selling soundtrack of all time. And to this day is probably in the top three or top five. And those songs have never not the main five, six, seven songs have never not been in circulation.
That's right.
And David Shire, let's not ignore David Shire's contribution. David Shire is a wonderful composer
Yes.
who's composed for movies like Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 and All the President's Men, and done a lot of like really great films. He takes the Bee Gees song "How Deep Is Your Love" and he uses that as Tony and Stephanie's theme or Tony's theme throughout the movie in a very subtle way. So he must have, when he came on board, the Bee Gees songs must have been there. But what I understand, listening to, I think it was John Badham on the Saturday Night Fever commentary track, and I
Were you
heard
listening
this
to
a
the
while.
DVD or a different version,
I was
different
watching the
edition?
Blu-ray. I'm sure it's the same commentary
Oh,
track.
okay.
But he said, like the first single from Saturday Night Fever that became a number one hit was "How Deep Is Your Love," but that wasn't even going to be in the movie until the last minute because it was the one song that they hadn't used throughout the film for the dance scenes or whatever. And they were editing the scene where Travolta's on the subway at the end going to Stephanie's place in Manhattan. This is after the bridge sequence.
It's a great sequence.
Yeah. And it starts out with this very like electronic pulsating score, which I'm sure is David Shire's music. And then Badham suggested, wait a minute, why don't we go back to one of the Bee Gees songs here? And they were looking and they said, well, the only one we haven't really used at this point is "How Deep Is Your Love?" So let's lay it over this sequence. And they do. And Badham loves it and says, this is great. This is going to work. And then it turns out that that becomes like the hit song of the movie when it first comes out. And if he had never put it in there, and then I don't think David Shire would have taken the theme from that and sort of threaded throughout the movie in very subtle ways. So it's interesting how that whole soundtrack came together. But the whole movie is so well crafted, and I happen to be a big fan of John Badham because he came onto the movie late. He replaced John Avildsen, who directed Rocky, and it's ironic that the Rocky poster is on the wall in Tony's room.
And a
Um,
Serpico poster, and
yeah,
the guy who wrote Serpico also wrote this. So look at
yeah,
that.
Norman Waxley, yeah. But Badham started out as a TV director, and I think Saturday Night Fever might have been his second feature film. But he went on to do some really great films like War Games, Stakeout, Blue Thunder, Dracula, which is one of my favorite Dracula films, the Frank Langella one. American Flyers, a great early Kevin Costner performance in a film that I think is very underrated and almost never spoken about.
And Bird on
And
a Wire, I think, is underrated.
yeah, I only saw Bird on Wire once, but I remember enjoying it.
Great use of popular culture all throughout that movie, particularly pop songs. In fact, I was introduced to Leonard Cohen's song Burr on a Wire through that movie, and also Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind, and a song by The Fifth Dimension, which was later used in other things, or and had been already used in countless different movies and stage musicals like Hair, for example.
Did I mention that Badham also directed Stakeout? I don't know if I mentioned that one,
Yes,
but
and that's a
I
great
love
comedy.
I love that movie. I think it was popular when it came out to the point that they made a sequel, which wasn't anywhere near as good. But I thought Stakeout was such a fun movie. Great rapport between Emilio Estevez and Richard Dreyfuss and
Yeah,
Madeline
Richard Dreyfuss
Stowe.
is great in that movie.
Yeah, and Madeline Stowe, I think it was one of her first performances, and she's fantastic in that. Another very underrated actress. And he also did that Richard Dreyfuss film, Whose Life Is It Anyway, which I thought was very good. And remember,
Yes.
in our first podcast, we talked about La Femme Nikita, and he directed the American remake, Point of No Return. So he's a fantastic director who sort of works in with diverse subject matter. You can't really pigeonhole Badham. He's a little bit like Alan Parker, who every movie that he did was almost in a different genre.
That's right. I think that Saturday Night Fever is his greatest film.
I agree with you.
It's
Yeah,
certainly his most iconic. And if he had only made Saturday Night Fever, he would be a great director because the aesthetic of this film is so unique. There's nothing else like it, certainly not before. And that's what really counts, right? A movie like Boogie Nights couldn't exist without Saturday Night Fever in so many ways, not just
yeah,
aesthetically, but even like you mentioned before, thematically. Because basically, Mark Wahlberg's character in Boogie Nights is naive in the same way that Tony is naive. They both think that if they're the king of a questionable realm, suddenly they're going to be a genuinely important and great human being. And so there's a lot of irony related to that. And by the way, in both films, there's a disillusionment with what the two
yeah.
protagonists are trying to aim for. And this movie, Saturday Night Fever in particular, is a very poignant movie. You mentioned the subway ride near the end. That's a great poignant moment. And that's also what makes the movie very sophisticated. It's not just about the highs, it's also about the lows. It shows what happens when you have a decadent culture with no restraints. It also shows you that you'll never be satisfied. You're either going to have too many restraints or too few. You know, society can't keep everyone happy all the time. And actually, it's funny. I've always seen Saturday Night Fever as sort of a variation on the Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Mask of the Red Death, because that's a short story about this prince who thinks he's safe inside his palace having these hedonistic orgies while everyone outside his castle is dying from the plague. And there are many parallels to that story in Saturday Night Fever, and certainly what would end up happening in real life toward the end of the disco era, in terms of, the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting, I think, how art mirrors life and vice versa. And this cycle of art influencing life and vice versa just never ends.
It's a
It just keeps
and
going.
it's also about a character who doesn't think really that much about his life, who thinks that going to the disco on a Saturday night and getting laid is the high point of his life, and he doesn't see a future beyond that until he meets this woman
That's
who's
correct.
only a year older than him, who comes across as sophisticated and for the most part like looks down on him. But in sort of hanging out with her and hearing about her life, and he sort of like his worldview goes from being like 4 by 3 to 2 3 5 suddenly, like his whole it just spreads open, and he sees something beyond this life that just seems like a repeat of what his father has done and being like a paycheck guy,
Yes.
and going through this tragedy at the end with the character of Bobby falling to his death, and he's suddenly awash in disillusionment about his life, and wants to run away from that. And he sort of crosses the bridge both in reality and metaphorically into trying to better his life, to become a more cultured person or to
Correct.
seek a better life. And there were obviously, let's not ignore, there was a not very good sequel to Saturday Night Fever called Staying Alive, which I actually enjoy watching the movie at the same time that I concede it's not a very good movie. But I think it's because I enjoy watching the Tony Manero character. I think Travolta imbues him with this crazy manic energy and optimism. And
Yes.
but you kind of see that if you ignore all the cheesy stuff about staying alive, you see where Tony's trajectory is heading. Because when you see him dance in the nightclub in Saturday Night Fever, you look at that guy and go, that guy should be a professional dancer. That guy is even overqualified to be on Broadway. He's so fucking good.
Yes.
And and makes sense in Staying Alive that he is now dancing in a Broadway show. But at the same time, we talk about the movies that wouldn't be made anymore. Already, by the time they make Staying Alive, they've sanitized everything about Saturday Night Fever. And I don't know whether this was Sylvester Stallone's hand in it, because Norman Wexler wanted to take his name off the film. He even filed a lawsuit. He was outraged what they did to his script, which is obviously Stallone rewriting it. But there's Staying Alive is exactly the version of Saturday Night Fever they would make today. I don't think anyone curses in Staying Alive. There's no raunchiness to it. There's no nudity. I don't even think there's even racist slurs. And so even though we're here in 2026 talking about the movies that won't make anymore, I think Staying Alive came out in
83.
83. Already they weren't making it anymore. And I find that interesting, both from where Tony's trajectory. I would have loved to see Staying Alive examine Tony's life on Broadway and in Manhattan, and but with the same raunchy flavor of Saturday Night Fever. I think it would have been a really interesting follow-up instead of this sanitized popcorn. I don't know what to make of Staying Alive. I mean, it's almost like an extended music video, really.
Well, that's what I said before. A lot of the movies that were influenced by Saturday Night Fever ended up being glorified music videos. They didn't have hardly any character development or an interesting plot or anything that would make them more sophisticated. Because that's what's hard to do, right? All of those sophisticated elements that are in Saturday Night Fever are what set it apart from not only movies of its kind, but from movies in general. Because most movies aren't as iconic or as revolutionary aesthetically,
Well, yeah,
especially as that movie.
Staying Alive feels like Rocky 3. And I'm not sure the year Rocky 3 came out, but they feel like the same movie with these extended montages to music, very little character development, very much
Rocky
just
3 was the year before,
okay, so there you go. So very
82.
much like an enjoyable ride. I mean, I do enjoy Rocky 3, but nothing deep to it. No, nothing challenging, nothing deeper than surface gloss to it. Where Saturday Night Fever is a real movie. It's a real exploration of this guy's background, his family life, his relationship with his friends, the weekend ritual of what they do. But each character in Saturday Night Fever, I mean, there's quite a few, his best friends, whether you want to call them the gang or whatever, they're all pretty delineated as who they are. You
That's
watch the
true.
movie and you come away figuring, okay, Barry Miller's character Joey, he's this messed up, insecure kid who's gotten
Yeah.
his girlfriend pregnant, who's obviously must come from a nightmarish family. All of them come from this religious background where they're growing up with the religion shoved down their mouths and dictating what the future of their lives will be. And one of the saddest scenes in Saturday Night Fever is when Bobby is trying to get the attention of Travolta's brother, Frank Jr., in the nightclub to tell him about
That's right.
his predicament with his pregnant girlfriend and whether Frank Jr. can get the Pope to give him a dispensation for the girlfriend to get an abortion. Like Frank Jr. is going to have a direct relationship with the Pope. And you can see that the character Bobby's going nowhere, like has a very limited future because the sadness that prevails him, and he's completely overshadowed and ignored. He's just the wheelman for the gang. And even when they go to beat up the rival gang that they believe beat up their buddy, he doesn't have the courage to even go in there and get involved in the fight. It's such a sad portrait of a character. And Barry Miller, who was a terrific actor,
Yes.
plays him so well. And when was Fame made? It was after Saturday Night Fever, or I think, right?
Yeah, no, it was. That's Alan
Because
Partner's movie.
yeah, because I feel Fame has.
1980.
Okay, you're right. So then he goes on to do Fame, and he does this terrific character in Fame that has a lot more edge to it. But Fame feels a lot to me like Saturday Night Fever, because Fame inhabits the similar playground, although I think it's set in Manhattan. But all the characters feel like they've got that gritty rawness. They feel like they are straight out of Saturday Night Fever, those characters in Fame. And again, Alan Parker directs Fame. He's not afraid of language, of grittiness, of showing the underside of New York. They very much feel like they would make a better double feature than Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive would.
Definitely. And also, it's a much grittier film. So,
And sorry, and to just interrupt you, and when they remade Fame, and I forget the date because I think it was in the early 2000s, they stripped it down to its barest essence. And again, they made the Staying Alive version of Fame.
yes,
So it seems like when they take these iconic, successful movies from the 70s and think about what today's audiences want, they just neuter them. And it's so unappealing to me. They literally make the TV versions of these things. And it makes you look at this time capsule period of the 1970s where edginess and honesty and grittiness and going for it, it just, I think the filmmakers were more in charge of the vision of these things. And then you get into
I
the
agree.
80s and the studio suits have taken over again. And while there were still some edgy movies in the 80s and 90s, nothing like the 70s. I mean, Saturday Night Fever
But the
really
21st
belongs.
century is far worse, especially post
Oh, yeah.
2010.
Oh, yeah.
The 80s, comparatively speaking, were a golden age. So yeah, it's just everything's relative,
Well,
you know?
audiences today and the people making these movies who are terrified to make these movies cannot make the differentiation between there are groups and subcultures of people who speak with profanity, who speak with racist language, who drop the N-word all the time. That does not mean the filmmakers are endorsing it,
Correct.
nor the viewers who go to see these movies would suddenly leave the theater and start behaving like that. They're afraid to show the world for what it really is.
And not
Whereas,
only that, when let's say it comes to the gang rape scene in Saturday Night Fever, if you don't ever dramatize scenes like that in movies, then you're not warning the masses about what dangers there are out there in the world. In other words, if you sanitize everything, if every movie is going to be a sanitized make-believe construct, then you're not preparing audiences for the real world at all, right? Like art should be a mirror or a distorted mirror at least
or at
to
least if
life.
you're or at least if you're showing that subject matter, show it with authenticity. Because
Yeah,
when we see when we even John Travolta's reaction while Annette has been raped in the back seat, you can see how much it pains him. And
that's
you can
right.
see how much regret he has that he couldn't protect her or didn't at the time because that code of broship, of like, I'm never going to go against my brothers in the gang. And then, when they all get out of the car and he turns to her and he goes, yeah, you are a cunt. That's all he can give her. He can't give her any compassion. He can only throw at her that you became the worst version of yourself. And there's just something we feel like we're watching these obviously fictional characters, but we feel like that situation felt really real.
Well,
And
so does
and we don't feel
Serpico.
yeah, and we
It's
don't
the
feel
same
good
writer.
about it. Yeah. We don't feel good about it. It's not remotely sexy. I mean, the sex in Saturday Night Fever, when you see it, is either guys have picked up women they've just met that night and gone and had a fast fuck in the backseat and they don't even know who they are, or it's sexual assault. Because even not long after that, or it's actually it was right before that scene where Tony drags Stephanie into the backseat of the car and thinks he's
That's
so
right.
he's so angry over the way the dance contest turned out that he uses it almost as an excuse to drag her into the back seat and treat her like any other woman that they would drag in the back seat, and she's not having it. But by the time she knees him in the balls, he's already crossed the line into sexual assault in that scene. And
Correct.
it's and it and but then you contrasted it against like what 5 minutes earlier when they're doing their dance in the club and they have this amazing chemistry between them that they actually can't help but start kissing in the middle of the dance. To go from that sort of romantic moment to him shoving her into the back seat, he just totally fucking blows it.
That's
But it's
right.
also because he's so full of himself in terms of he doesn't care in the moment about the joy that Stephanie's attaining by having won the dance contest, even though it's, as he says, rigged. He just cares about his own bullshit feelings, but it's also complicated by the fact that he actually has standards. He actually is an honest broker, and it insults him that these better dancers were given the prize. So there's all this complexity going through this guy's head that no remake of this movie would ever fucking try.
No. And the thing is, it wouldn't try for a number of reasons. One, because we are in a much more dumbed down culture right now that doesn't promote complex anything in the arts or in society at large for that matter. But then, yes, you also have the corporate element and many other elements. But I think that's just a commentary also on the way we live now. We
I
don't
mean,
have sophisticated books. We don't have
yeah,
sophisticated movies. We don't have sophisticated music. We're living in a very dumbed down period. You know, there was the Enlightenment, and right now we're in the age of stupid or age of stupidity. You
yeah.
know, that's what we're in right now. Everything has to be not just
I almost,
simple, but worse than that.
I almost wish that we could make movies like Saturday Night Fever today, and then to appease the Suits or the PG-13 crowd, they would take the movie and make a PG-13 version that could be released side by side. As long as you could get the real movie out there, which is a shitty situation to have to do, to say we have to make a sanitized version for the people who can't handle it or would be morally, I mean, would be offended. But we're not even getting the authentic version of these films anymore because everybody goes, well, no, it has to be PG-13. If you were making Saturday Night Fever today and let's substitute disco for whatever the latest dance craze is, they would be aiming, because it's such a corporate business today, they would be telling you, if you're making a youth-driven movie, it has to be PG-13.
That's right.
And that means you cannot incorporate almost any of the elements of Saturday Night Fever into it. And that is where we are today. I'm trying to think of a movie, and maybe you can, that's been made in the last 20 years that is youth targeted, meaning the lead characters are essentially teenagers or actors performing as teenagers in a very gritty setting, in a very sexual setting. Even, when Fast Times in Ridgemont High came out, and I know that's going to be a movie we're going to discuss down the line as one of the movies that won't make anymore. But they approached that movie aimed at teenagers, but showing real sexuality, real, language. It was funny, it was tender, it was edgy, it was offensive at times. But what is that movie today?
I can't think of any, and I certainly can't think of any that have become iconic. So the answer is I don't know of any.
I'm sure maybe someone will come up with an example or not, but it would be the very rare one and probably
And
wouldn't
certainly
be.
none that have become iconic, which is already indicative of a decline, right? Because there is no Saturday Night Fever of the 21st century, and especially not since the year 2010, where I think things really went downhill for culture in the West. Yeah, I can't think of a single one. And I can't even think of a movie that, let's say, might be a small indie film that does any of the things that you've described. The closest that I can think to a movie that resembles Saturday Night Fever would be Silver Linings Playbook, which is featuring older characters. They're
Yeah.
not in their teens. And that movie is partly inspired by Saturday Night Fever, especially when it comes to the dance contest at the end. I can't think, though, of a movie, and that is a great movie in my opinion, but I can't think of a movie that involves teenagers or even people in their early 20s that has the same kind of raw
You know what?
power.
You mentioned it in the last episode, but I think the closest comparison to Saturday Night Fever is Euphoria.
I was going to say that now again, except the difference is that I find Euphoria problematic, not because of the sexual content itself, but because what the show doesn't do. For example, it doesn't have, compared to Saturday Night Fever, as much of a sophisticated moral compass. It's sort of from top to bottom populated with what you could call reprobates. I might be exaggerating, but it doesn't have.
Degenerates.
Yeah, degenerates, reprobates, whatever you want to call them. I'm maybe exaggerating a
Lost
bit, but
Souls.
lost souls. But the thing is, there's no balance, comparatively speaking, right? Everything that we just said about Tony himself is absent from the
Well,
entirety of
well, I
Euphoria.
think with
Granted, though, I haven't watched every episode, but from
well,
what
I
I
think
have
with a
seen,
TV series, one of the reasons you probably feel that is because TV has no third act. You can't resolve any character's storyline in the same way you can with a 2 hour movie because you got to keep it going. So the Euphoria is definitely about some of the most fucked up characters you've ever seen in your life. And going into its third season, which I think is its last season, they're all out of high school now, and they're all just crashing like big time.
but they were
But it's
crashing
not
before
as it. It's
too.
not. What's that?
They were crashing before
Yeah,
as
but it's not
well,
as
so.
it's not as interesting because now they just feel like any other characters involved in like low level crime plots. Whereas when they were in high school, it was, well, this is pretty edgy for high school kids. So
That's
I don't
right.
think I don't while it's still well made, I don't think the show holds on to the power that it had in the first two
But there
seasons.
is no character, or at least there's not a prominent enough character in Euphoria
Well, also
who,
that's also because it's not Euphoria is an ensemble piece, and Saturday Night Fever is really not. It's
that's
really
correct.
Travolta's
But it doesn't
movie.
matter. It doesn't matter if it's the main character or just a prominent character. The point is there is no, let's say, failed saint like Tony or like Timothy Hutton's character in Ordinary People, or Tom Cruise's character in Risky Business, characters who have a soft side to them, a sweet side to them, despite all of their flaws. So I just find that a glaring omission from the universe of Euphoria. But what I do appreciate about Euphoria is its willingness to take risks. I definitely appreciate that. But tonally, it's not as complex as Saturday Night Fever, to bring the conversation back to Saturday Night Fever. Because Saturday Night Fever has a wide emotional spectrum and it has a
Yeah,
wide aesthetic spectrum because sometimes the movie's hyper gritty, sometimes it's ultra expressionistic, like for example during the More Than a Woman dance
yeah,
sequence.
oh yeah.
And then sometimes, including in that sequence,
And
by the
it's
way,
also
you
very
have
romantic. It's a very
yes,
romantic movie.
very much so. But sometimes, just like in that More Than a Woman dance sequence, you have grit and expressionism that could harken back to the German expressionist period. Except now you have psychedelic lighting instead of sophisticated shadow play.
Yeah,
But
I was making the connection between the shows, not so much to compare them as do you think this is a better show or does this appeal to you, but the tone and the risque quality and the balls to show
I agree with you. It does do that.
nudity and have the language and have the darkness on screen. Not necessarily as is this a similar template in terms of the kind of movie it is. But Saturday Night Fever is almost like a gritty R-rated fairy tale.
That's right.
And everything outside of the 2001 Odyssey nightclub is just sort of run down and sort of given a very mean streets kind of look, which is also another movie that was released around within a couple of years and had that sort of street feel to it. But within the nightclub, there is very much a dreamy quality. Characters appear to feel like they glide, and because of the use of the Steadicam and John Badham's putting the camera up, shooting down from a high angle, and you're feeling like
Yes.
this subculture moving as one.
Well, look at how John Travolta's character enters the club for the first time, how
Yeah, I
dramatic
love
that
that.
is, and how cool
And
he
that's what
looks.
Boogie Nights took that exact moment, you
Yes.
know? Yeah.
And by the way, I don't think we've spent enough time talking about how charismatic John Travolta is in this movie. This movie works so well in part because his performance is incredible, especially when you consider how young he was.
Yeah. And the
Right?
physicality of the performance. I mean,
Yes,
he took months or whatever it was to learn those dance moves, and they are insanely brilliant by any standard. Watching him dance and do those, what do you call those squatting moves on the dance floor, it's just insane.
it is.
You actually look at the human body and see the capability of it and how attractive and appealing it can be. What a sort of beautiful design it is when you see Travolta dancing in those sequences. And the scenes with Karen Langoni when they're dancing together too. I mean, I
Yes.
love the scene in the dance studio where they're trying out these different moves and how cool it is and it's very, it's not just the sexiness of it, but it's like I'm not a dancer at all, but I wouldn't even think to know how to turn my body in those contortions and have it become what they do. And it's interesting also contrasting the two dance performances that won the first and second place. The Puerto Rican couple that won had this very high energy, aggressive kind of dance moves that were great. But Travolta and Karen Langoni's dance is very romantic.
That's right.
It would be like if you got married and that was your opening dance, you would have everybody up on their feet. How cool that was. So I don't know if I agree that the Puerto Rican couple should have won the dance contest because while they were very good, it felt very choreographed. Whereas what Tony and Stephanie do, there was this passion and
Oh,
soulfulness
I
to it.
agree with you. And the other thing that sort of proves your point is most viewers remember the More Than a Woman dance, not the Puerto Rican dance.
Well,
So,
we should hope so because
well, there
that
you
is
go. Well, there you go. So then what does that tell you, right? No one talks about how great that Puerto Rican dance was. Right? Years later, people aren't making movies that are homages to that dance.
But it was
So
interesting. It's the one interesting moment. It's the one interesting moment with Tony in the movie because all throughout the movie, they're using these racial slurs to refer to Latino people. And then he is in the moment watching this Puerto Rican couple, and he's not even thinking in terms of race. While his buddies are all like, "Oh, we're never going to give this war to them because they're not from the neighborhood and they're interlopers and all this." But in that moment, Travolta's transfixed by the skillfulness of their dance that he doesn't even see color, he doesn't see creed
that's
or
right.
anything like that, and it gives him a kind of purity to his character, even though he's misguided because he underrates his own performance in their own dance
He
performance.
believes in meritocracy, which is another
Yeah,
reason this movie couldn't
yeah.
be made today. Right? Imagine even Tony, who's not an intellectual, who's not educated, he has more common sense at times than many of our academics today. And also they can't dance as well, so there you go. Or at least I don't think they can. But here's the thing. Another interesting aspect of John Travolta's performance in this movie is that he plays the strutting peacock, so to speak, but he imbues that strutting peacock character with emotional vulnerability, and it's often peeking through the confident exterior that he tries to uphold. And what a great nuanced performance it is. Like, for example, when he reveals his age to Stephanie,
Yeah.
look at the embarrassment that, he's trying to
And
fight
yeah,
back.
that's such a great scene
It
because
is.
she's like throwing out these all these names to him of these celebrities, and he's trying to go with the conversation, but he's completely lost. Laurence Olivier,
Yeah.
both to Stephanie means the guy in the Polaroid commercials, never mind the how many years of theater and movies the guy's done. And then Travolta is like, well, can you get us a discount on a camera? I mean, there's such a sweet naivete to the guy. And he's quite disparaging to Stephanie in that very conversation. And at the same time, she doesn't seem to take umbrage at it. She's like, I like you. you
That's
know?
right. But the other thing, and this is part of his charm as an actor, and I don't know how much of it was written or told to him by the director versus how much John Travolta himself brought to this aspect of his character. But even in the opening sequence where he's strutting along and trying to pick up chicks, it's endearing what he's doing, even though today it wouldn't be politically correct what he's up to.
well, well,
Um,
as I said, John Avildsen was supposed to direct this. And the reason that he stepped down was creative differences, but it was the fact that Avildsen actually wanted to do the today version of this movie. He wanted to turn it more into like Rocky or Karate Kid and take away all the rough edges and take away all the profanity and the sexual assault stuff. And
well,
not
thank
normally,
God he didn't get his way.
yeah, yeah, because I like him as a director, and he did his own fair share of edgy stuff.
But in relation
But
to this movie, that would have been horrible.
no, it would have been terrible. And Travolta got that part. Travolta said, no, we're doing the edgy version of it. And I'll tell you a funny story because I was going to do a movie with John Travolta, and I won't get into the long aspect of why it didn't happen. But we were on the phone one time, and I was just going on about Saturday Night Fever to him. And I was saying, I really respect how like gritty that film was. And he went and he recited the lines from the film to me. He pointed out, in the conversation when I say to the Annette character, "You're either a nice girl or a cunt," he started doing that on the phone to me,
Oh,
and
wow.
I thought it was like, this is so surreal. He's doing the line reading about it, but he went on to emphasize how that raw quality was what gave that movie its appeal, because people went in, they were quite shocked about and a lot of that is credit to Norman Wexler, because apparently Norman Wexler had this affinity for colorful street language. And if you read some of the published stories about Wexler, who was bipolar, but he was such an eccentric character that Norman Wexler would go out with his assistant into the street, and they would take a tape recorder, and Wexler would take a suitcase full of money, and they would go and antagonize people generally of minority races and get in their faces and and he would record their reactions to him. He would say the most offensive things to them, and he would record how they would respond because he wanted to use that authentic language in his script. And then the suitcase of money came into play because he would then pay them off instead to stop them from killing him or beating him up.
Oh, wow.
And he had, and his assistant, I forget the guy's name, and I think he wrote a book or something about it. The assistant felt like their lives were in danger every time he went out with Norman. And it's just the most insane
Someone should
story.
make a movie about that.
Absolutely. Somebody should
That'd
make
be cool.
a movie about this guy. I mean, there's also the story about Norman Wexler goes into a donut store and he wants to cut in line and order some donuts. And the person behind the counter says, you got to wait your turn. So Norman Wexler waits his turn. And I don't know if this is like folklore or whatever it is, but when he gets to the front of the counter, he proceeds to buy every donut in the store and then proceeds to go into the back of the store and buy all the donut making, the sugar and the flour and everything. He cleans out the entire store, and he told his assistant to go dump all the donuts, but the assistant took it to like a food pantry or something like that for unhoused people. And Norman Wexler leaves one glazed donut in the counter and walks out. So when you transpose that into this guy writing the language in Saturday Night Fever, like I think maybe my favorite line from Saturday Night Fever, it's a pretty blue line, is when Travolta's buddies come to pick him up in the car and he reaches for the door and they drive off before he can get in. And then they come back and he finally gets in the car and then he complains and he says, you almost broke my pussy finger.
Yeah. Well, by the way, you realize that this was the year before The Deer Hunter.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so why
Okay.
is that
Yeah.
significant?
Yeah, no, because that scene is in The Deer Hunter.
Yeah, so they copied Saturday Night Fever unless it was a complete coincidence. But I don't
It is,
know,
yeah.
was it?
I have no idea, but they're very. Although De Niro doesn't complain about almost breaking his pussy finger, so it
No,
doesn't have
that's
the
true.
power of
That's
that
true.
scene.
Actually, there are many parallels if you think of it between Saturday Night Fever and The Deer Hunter. The way that the blue collar guys, pal around with each other and are, of course, politically incorrect, which is just how people are in real life, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's not like this is a revolutionary concept, but it's revolutionary only in the sense that it's being depicted honestly on screen in both Saturday Night Fever and The Deer Hunter. But there are many similarities. And even when it comes to, let's say, Michael trying to help other members of his crew, including Christopher Walken ultimately, Tony does the same thing. He fails in many respects, but
yeah.
he tries to reach out to, his brother or to other characters and
And
elevate
that's
them a
another.
bit.
And you just mentioning that is one of the most disappointing things about Staying Alive, the sequel, where they bring in none of the characters from Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive,
Well,
and
there's
you
no
want to.
continuity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there is just with the mother,
Yeah, but that's
but
not good enough.
yeah, no, no. I wanted to know. I wanted to know what happened to, where they were, or I don't hate Staying Alive. I just don't think it's a worthy sequel. Not even on the level of, we love Chinatown, but Two Jakes was such a disappointment. But Two Jakes is actually, I think, a good movie in its own right. It just doesn't honor Chinatown
Yes.
enough. And Two Jakes wasn't filmed in widescreen, and it didn't feature Jerry Goldsmith's iconic score. And there were a lot of things that didn't. And I feel like Saturday Night Fever, Staying Alive doesn't do the same thing for other than the song Staying Alive. I don't think it honors Saturday Night Fever in tone at all.
I agree. And actually, another thing that we should talk about is how instrumental the Bee Gees music is to making this film work and how great, at least in my opinion, the Bee Gees are. I mean, it was fashionable for a while to knock them. And by the way, I wasn't alive for the backlash to disco, the immediate backlash, so I never fully understood what it was all about. I just personally think it's overblown and ridiculous, but maybe it partly has to do with the fact that the Bee Gees music in particular is so emotive. And
Yeah.
let's just say today we live in very fragile times where people are afraid to show their emotions. And any music that really is unabashed in its emotional outpouring is going to rub people the wrong way, perhaps, right? It's very interesting to think about. We
Well,
don't really have music like that anymore. I don't mean specifically with a disco sound. I'm just saying music that, let's say, has a melody, that has an emotional
Well,
pull
well,
to it.
music doesn't feel so well produced as it was at the time, and every one of those Bee Gee tracks is just so beautifully produced. I love the Bee Gees. I loved them then when
So
I
do I.
heard Saturday Night Fever for the first time, and I had the soundtrack. And then a couple of years ago, Frank Marshall directed a great documentary on the
Yeah, I
Bee Gees.
watched it.
And you watch that again and you go, God, these guys were so fantastic. They had such a distinctive sound. And I
Yes.
gravitate towards performers, musicians, singers who have a very specific sound and aren't interchangeable. And I have to say, there are a lot of best-selling singers out there, some of the most popular singers who just sound interchangeable to me. And I couldn't tell you sometimes when hearing them sing who they are versus this singularity of Sinead O'Connor or even Sting, his voice, or even Boz Scaggs, or there were so many people who had, they've got such a distinct personality in the way they sing, and the Bee Gees as a group, you could never mistake them for anybody else with
Correct.
that falsettos, that Barry Gibb falsetto, and the rich production of the music, and it just puts you in a good mood. I mean, I hear Saturday Night Fever and I'm in a good mood. And it's funny
Same.
because the movie is a little bit depressing at times.
That is true, but that contrast is beautiful, right? Seeing the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. It's what makes the movie complex and gives it emotional texture, not just a tactile visual quality, which it definitely does. By the way, this is also one of the most tactile films ever made, not just because everyone's wearing polyester, but because it really just the camera's always putting people's clothes and their sweat right in your face. You know what I mean? Nothing's hidden. This
Well,
movie just
even when Tony's sitting at the table and the woman comes up to him with the handkerchief and
yeah,
says,
there you
"Tony, can I
go.
can I wipe the sweat off your even off your forehead?" And even that becomes a moment, like an erotic moment, right?
That's right. Oh, and I love the moment where this woman, gets kissed by him, and then she says, "I've just been kissed by Al Pacino." What
Yeah,
a, what what a great moment.
it's such a great moment. It seems like they were twin sisters or something when they're both
Yeah.
like he's dancing with him together. And that dance that he does with him totally feels like, wait a minute, this is like a threesome going on here. It had that kind of sexiness, except it was on the dance floor.
That's right.
They're also carefree and loose, and they're so thrilled to be dancing with Tony. It's like, my God, I got my moment with Tony tonight. And the women are very sexy, they seem all very sexually forward. They understand. I know it sounds terrible, but they understand like their role in the club is to make themselves available to Tony and his crew.
That's right. Well, you know what? They could have turned this into a vampire movie.
It's true.
If you think about it, and that's why I said I was like semi-serious when I was comparing it to The Mask of the Red Death, because this is like the perfect setting for a horror movie if you think about it. Like they could have, Phantom of the Paradise, for example, the Brian De Palma movie, right? You
Yeah.
could you could see a version of Saturday Night Fever that is a horror comedy in addition to everything else that it is. Like maybe Tony's a vampire, or he becomes a vampire, and then you have to see his
Well, they
struggles.
they they did that version. It was with George Hamilton, Love at First Bite.
Okay, there you go.
He was a disco dancing
No,
vampire.
that's right. That's correct. But with John Travolta, the same character, but now he becomes that would have been a better sequel. Tony becomes a vampire to add to his problems. There you go. Or maybe
Yeah.
or maybe he actually has fewer problems now that he's a vampire. You never know.
That's true. And going back to the Bee Gees music, they didn't know that they'd be using the Bee Gees music when they shot the film. And my understanding is, was it Alan Carr or was it Robert Stigwood? I think it was Alan Carr who the Bee Gees were there in France somewhere or something recording an album, and he went to them and pitched the movie, and they said, well, we don't have time to read the script, but we'll just write a couple of songs. And a week or two later, and they did them in record time, rough versions of the songs turned up on a cassette on Alan Carr's desk, and it was like it were like 6 or 7 songs, and they all went on to become #1 hits.
Yes. Well, do you think that this is the either greatest or one of the greatest soundtracks of all time? I think maybe only The Graduate could compete with it in terms of a
Oh, the
soundtrack.
song soundtracks.
Yeah, song
Yeah.
soundtrack, composed of songs
I,
that
I
are
think it.
not
I think it.
just part of an
I think
instrumental
it's.
score.
I think it's number one. I think to me it's number one. I think Fame had a great soundtrack. I'm trying to think what else I would put on. Grease was very popular, but I don't listen to Grease. I mean, there's some good songs on there, but the style of music is very much of the period. Saturday Night Fever is a very sexy soundtrack, but it's also a great easy listening soundtrack. It's a great soundtrack to put on when you're just chilling. And that
Yes.
Staying Alive track, just Staying Alive. The moment you hear the first notes of Staying Alive, you know what it is. The way it starts, and I love the way the movie starts, where the camera is traveling. Is it traveling from Manhattan into Brooklyn? I think, and then
Yeah, you
then you
see the
see the
bridge. Yeah,
you see
correct.
the train come by, and then I think it dissolves or cuts to Travolta's feet walking on the sidewalk, and he's carrying the can of paint, and I love
Yes.
that. I love that opening, and Staying Alive is playing over the titles. And even the way they burn the credits onto the screen like disco neon, and then at times, Travolta's checking out all the women,
That's right.
and then the camera then takes on his point of view once or twice during that sequence where he's like strutting and trying to stop these attractive women on the sidewalk, and the one gorgeous woman that he's sort of jousting with, she like it keeps darting to the left or right of the camera when it's his point of view,
So
and then
well done.
and she has this little smile like just forget about it, and it's great. It only stops for the pizza, and it has to be mentioned that the woman who delivers serves in the pizza is his sister,
Yeah.
and then the woman in the paint store who's buying the paint that they were out of, and he had to go buy it from another paint store. That's his mother. It's the only cameo she ever did.
So this is a real home movie in addition to everything else. I was
Well,
going to
clearly
add,
Travolta had a certain amount of clout on that film because
yeah.
he was popular from his TV show Welcome Back, Kotter, right? And so it'd be like somebody like John Hamm transitioning from Mad Men into theatrical film, and it's all a project set up around him. So Travolta had some weight, even though we didn't know. And here's the funny thing: in South Africa, we had barely had TV by that point. I think we were 1 or 2 years into having TV, or so we definitely did not have Welcome Back, Kotter. I had no idea who John Travolta was
Yes.
until I saw the movie. And the pre-publicity leading up to the movie release was talking about John Travolta, this star of this and of this show, but we had no idea. So it was like going in to see like the first Bond movie I saw was Goldfinger, and I had heard about James Bond, and everybody was talking about James Bond. But when Sean Connery first came on the screen in Goldfinger, I was like, "Is that James Bond? Really? That's James Bond?" But I didn't know who Travolta was in Saturday Night Fever, but he just captures your eye right from the start. And of
When
course,
did you
he's
see Carrie?
I saw Carrie when I was about, and it was on a pirated videotape because it was heavily censored or banned in South Africa. It was one of the two. I saw it when I was about, I think the first time I saw Carrie was about 17 on
Okay,
a
so you saw it
pirated
later
videotape.
because that movie was
Oh, yeah.
released in America the year before Saturday Night
Yeah.
Fever.
Yeah.
John
I did
Travolta is
not,
also in it.
yeah, I did not see Carrie in the theater in South Africa. I'm trying to remember if I don't know if Carrie was banned or not. But I didn't see Carrie, so I didn't even know he was in Carrie.
And that
And
movie, by the way, has a great, well, and it's a prom dance, but it's a great psychedelically
oh yeah,
colored sequence. What a
yeah,
great
and again,
romantic sequence that
very
is.
romantic until the blood falls on
Yeah,
him.
what look at the irony there, right? So that's great, right? A sense of irony that this romantic fairy tale is going to turn into a horror movie, which it does. So it's great to see that contrast. But one other thing I was going to add about the opening of Saturday Night Fever is that I was introduced to a new method of eating pizza, the double decker style. I've never attempted it. I'm too I'm too concerned that I'll mess it up because it seems like it would be difficult, especially if it's very greasy pizza. You
So
know,
you only saw Saturday Night Fever what year?
well, it was sometime in the 90s when I was in my single digits. So I saw it, obviously way after it was originally released. And it's interesting too because you were talking about how you saw a version of it that was edited for a younger audience. Well, I remember the first time I saw Goodfellas, it was on a local television channel and it was put on at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and it was completely censored. All the profanity was removed. So I would love to get a copy of that version because it would be hilarious to listen to now, where every time they swear, right,
It's
a benign word,
it's
and
so disturbing to me, that infantilism of not respecting audiences to see these films the way they were intended. And I got a taste of that when it's happened with all my movies. But with Running Scared, they asked me, would I do the cleanup script for it? And they send you a list of all these words that you can substitute for fuck or Jesus Christ, or, like Judas Priest instead of Jesus Christ.
wow.
And my first reaction was, fuck this. I'm not going to be involved in like destroying my baby. But then I wanted these elaborate end credits in Running Scared with the fairy tale image, the Grimm's fairy tale images, which would bring home for the audience what they were seeing throughout the movie. And they were going to cost like, I think 60 to 100 grand or something. So I was able to negotiate with the financiers of the movie. I said to them, okay, I will do all the TV lines for you, but then you've got to give me the end credits. And amazingly, they agreed to it. It literally took me about an hour to just go through the singled out lines and just dump in substitute words for them. And it was such a ridiculous process. And
I can only imagine.
and I never really watched that version in full, but the funny thing is, but Warner Brothers at one point had made a new distribution deal for the TV version of Running Scared with another channel, and they reached out to me and said, would you approve it?" Which was, I'd never had that happen, and I thought that's strange. So I watched the cut, thinking there wasn't going to be much of the movie left. There was not one frame of violence cut. It was just the sex was sort of blurred out or blown in, and then they had all the substitute profanity, which was ridiculous because Running Scared is on the list of the most profanity-laden movies of all time. I think it's, at one point it was like number 3 or 4. I don't know, it may be number 9 or 10 or something like that. So you can see how many
That's a
lines.
cool record to have, by the way.
I mean, it is, but in the same way, it's like, why? Why is that even a fucking thing?
Well, young
But
people especially would probably be impressed by it.
I don't know. I
If
think
they're
young
in
people have
elementary
become very.
school or something.
I think young people have become very prudish. One of the.
Yeah, the uncool ones, but the cool ones, they
Yeah.
know their shit.
We live in a time. We live in a time where everybody's got a cell phone, or you never know who's recording you.
Yes.
And so I realized recently that when you're together with your friends or you're in a restaurant or whatever, and you're talking, you find yourself censoring yourself all the time, because this cloud of, oh, somebody's going to cancel you for saying the wrong thing or using some like word usage that could be construed as racist or sexist or something.
Yes.
And it's not like I think in those terms, but occasionally I'm talking about a movie in those terms or something like that. Like, you're stopping yourself all the time going, wait a minute. Like, even, and I find this the most ridiculous thing, like when talking about buying a house or selling a house and you're talking about the bedrooms, you're not allowed to say, and I say you're not allowed in terms of polite society anymore, master bedroom. You have to say primary bedroom.
Really? I didn't
And
know that.
yeah,
How did you learn about this?
my wife was saying you can't say master bedroom anymore, and I'm going, what? This is ridiculous.
Where did you find out about that? I've never heard of that.
No, I promise you, it's a real thing.
No, I'm
It's a
sure
real,
it is, but I've never, like, where
I,
did she hear about it? Or where did you hear about it?
well, my wife also watches a lot of these home restoration TV shows,
Oh, that could be why.
and it's on there all the time. But I'm telling you, if you use the term master bedroom right now, you're going to get chastised for it.
Well, the solution to that is watch Saturday Night Fever and it will put you in the mood to do whatever you want because it's a very liberating film. Even though, like we've said many times, it also shows the dark side of having too much freedom, which is
Yeah,
also,
well,
I think, one of the most fascinating things about the movie, right? Because basically it shows you're never going to find true satisfaction. You're always missing something. The grass is always greener on the other side.
but I'll tell you how bad it's become, and this is already years and years ago. My son was in high school and he was doing a screenwriting class, and this has to be 5, 6, 7 years ago, no longer even. And they were reading, they were reading through, trying to remember what script it was. it doesn't really matter what it, but maybe it was Pulp Fiction, maybe it was something a really an Oscar-winning script. They were using it as a teaching device for screenwriting, and they were having the class read it.
Yes.
And this one kid gets to the N word, which is plentiful in whatever the script was. I'm trying to remember what it was. Maybe it was a Spike Lee film. I'm not sure. And he says the word in the script. So clearly he's not intending to be racist or aiming at anybody. He's just reading what's the script. The whole class came down on him. They had to reach out to his parents at home.
Really?
It was the most bullshit thing.
Well, who assigned the script? Did the teacher assign it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, then why is it his fault? The teacher assigned it.
I know, but it's sort of like this group think now that if you see certain words in print and you're reading something, you should automatically know to reduce it to the N word, the S word.
Well, then why didn't the teacher tell him that beforehand?
I don't know. The teacher may have made some mention, but just the idea that you're reading a classic script.
No, I agree. It's ridiculous.
To censor the speech in that context, the idea is nobody should be saying that to another human being, but the fact is people do. And culturally, Black people use it all the time. And so if you're not a Black person, you don't get to use it, which is, I mean, it's strange that it should be okay for one group and not for another. But it's just in the context of studying film or
no,
songs.
It's totally ridiculous. And
this is how overly structured and censored we are as a society now, and it's infected film. So
I wonder what would happen if, for example, a high school teacher were to show Saturday Night Fever to a classroom full of young students.
They would never be allowed to. They would lose their job for doing it.
That's a possibility, but let's just say they didn't lose their job. I just wonder what the students would say as the movie is playing. Would they have a riot of some kind, or?
I think they would be stunned. I mean, look, let's not assume a bunch of them haven't seen the movie.
Yes.
I remember showing 48 Hours to my son and saying this is a great movie. It's one of my favorite Walter Hill movies. And of course the N-word is all over that movie. And he was so uncomfortable during the screening that afterwards, he said to me, I didn't like that film. And I think it was because he was made to feel so uncomfortable. And
what year was that? What did you show him it?
Again, probably like 10 years ago.
Have you ever showed him Saturday Night Fever?
I did. I think I did. I think he liked it. I think, I've shown him every transgressive movie eventually at some point, including Scarface. And
no education is complete without the transgressive film class.
Yeah, but just as to prove you the example, my son has seen every which kind of film you could possibly imagine. The only films I've never sat through with him on films that had hardcore porn sequences. And he's never his speech with his friends, he would never use these words. He would never emulate that behavior of Saturday Night Fever. He would never. I mean, the way my son conducts himself, and I'm not just saying that as to say, "Woo, look at this great kid I brought up." I don't know whether it's a generational thing or the subgroup that are his friends. They're all incredibly polite to one another when they hang out. And
well, that's great.
I don't think they use a lot of profanity in the way they speak or any kind of slurs or anything. Of course, I can't say that I've been the fly on the wall when they all get together.
Yeah,
but they're kind of a benevolent little tribe of people,
well, that has its advantages. But the thing is,
they're good. They're good people, but they understand art. My son's an artist, so he understands art. I think he would have a very different reaction to 48 Hours today as he's 25.
Yes.
And he would look at it as, well, that film is showing you a time period, a subculture. I mean, the use of the N-word in 48 Hours gives Eddie Murphy's character so much power in terms of the way he uses it, and
every Eddie Murphy
uncomfortable with it.
Every Eddie Murphy film from that period is empowering Eddie Murphy.
But what I'm saying is his use of it in 48 Hours is knowing that he's making white people feel uncomfortable when he uses it. He's distilling all the negative power of the use of the word out of it and using it as a weapon back against them. And if you don't see that in 48 hours, you're an idiot. And I think Nolte uses the word disparagingly to him at one point, and you can see that Nolte is kind of ashamed of doing it.
Yes, but I guess a larger thing to just comment on in relation to this issue that you've brought up, stemming from the language that's used in Saturday Night Fever, but then we've broadened the conversation to language used in films in general, is that if you, as an artist, censor your work, self-censor it so that it doesn't show audiences how people actually behave, then you're doing the culture and the society beyond just the culture a disservice, I think, because you're creating a false representation of reality that is divorced from substance. It's different if you're creating a sanitized version of reality for an artistic purpose, for some, larger than life poetic purpose. But if you're doing it just for the sake of self-censorship, then I think that that's a bad idea. And it's just like the same thing with gangster movies. Gangsters, of course, are going to use foul language. That's the least of their problems. And that's the other thing, too, that makes no sense, and the hypocrisy. And you sort of made me think about this when you were talking about your experience having to alter some of the words in one of the versions of Running Scared. Violence is okay in many cases, right? Extreme violence is okay. Killing people is okay on screen, but using certain words, no, that's awful. Or God forbid you should show a sex scene that's too explicit, right? And that's always been sort of hypocritical aspect of Western culture more generally. It's not just confined to 20th or 21st century film. And one could argue the reason for that is because we have to sort of hide away certain aspects of sex. Otherwise, society couldn't function because people would just be screwing all day long. And, the buses wouldn't come on time and the trains wouldn't come on time and all the institutions would fall apart.
Well,
Right. So that's the idea, I guess, behind it.
it seems that American culture today is horribly embarrassed by sex and by language, but embraces violence. And you even see that in the way after the United States attacked Iran, and then Trump and Pete Hegseth started putting out these almost like really offensive music videos backed up by like pop songs of all of these drone attacks on the Iranian sites, or people, completely disregarding that this is human life you're watching being vaporized, and turning the violence, treating it almost as cinematically in a way
Yes.
that is more like you're seeing action replays from some kind of football game than you're actually watching war and death. But with sex, we've talked about this before, but in film and TV today, you see sex, but it's very much in the background. You see nudity, but it's very much in the background. It's not the lead actors doing it, it's the background actors. So if somebody attends an orgy, you'll see the background actors, or they're brought in like porn stars or people willing to do nudity, but your lead characters are not doing it. And in the
Yes.
70s, 80s, 90s, the lead characters were very much doing it. If you watch the great movie, I'll use an example, Arthur Penn's Night Moves,
Hmm.
almost every character in their natural state, like they're sitting in bed, like they'll be naked, or in a sex scene, they'll be naked. Or Melanie Griffith, as young as she was, is going for a nude swim, takes her clothes, jumps in. There's not a shame about it, because honestly, the way I feel about it is the human body is beautiful, and we should not be ashamed or embarrassed or
The
accused of being
Greeks tended to agree with you.
perverts for wanting to see, for enjoying nudity or appreciating nudity. And I think that whole notion is gone out the window. We might as well be like wearing burqas in this society, because we're
Well,
heading in
that's
that
also
direction.
happening, but that's a separate issue. Or maybe
Yeah,
it's not a separate issue. But yeah,
but
it's the
it's that
same idea that,
but it's that mentality. It's that mentality of, one of the things I've always loved about film is that it can replicate a certain authenticity, and that's what engages me. And when I feel the fakeness of it, and even the fakeness of all this digital photography, this got this flatness, this sameness, I am distanced from it. And in gritty movies, in thrillers, in heavy dramas. I mean, I could name 1,000 movies to you where nudity was treated artfully and respectfully, whether it's Jane Fonda and John Boyd in Coming Home, Donald Sutherland, Julie Christie in Don't Look Now. The list is endless of these powerful performances where we felt we were, Jill Clayburgh in An Unmarried Woman. She's in the bedroom with her husband and she's getting changed, and it's natural. It's what she would have done. And we feel like we're there. It just brings us a little bit closer. And at the same time, I respect a movie that doesn't want to do nudity, but then don't dangle fake sex scenes in front of us, because I'm going to be pulled out of it. I'm going to be turned off from it. And in Saturday Night Fever, which is quite unusual, they have this nightclub, the 2001 Odyssey, but then it has this adjacent bar area where you've got this woman doing a striptease.
That's right.
And I always thought, like, what nightclub? And maybe I didn't go to enough nightclubs because I wasn't from America at the time. What nightclub has a nude stripper in the bar area? I'm still trying to get my head around it.
Well,
I would have been at that nightclub every weekend, maybe.
Well, I've seen other movies where they'll have, let's say, someone naked at Studio 54, just wandering around.
But that was kind of the culture and the vibe of Studio 54. Was anything happened?
Yeah, so I guess you could also have a stripper too, I guess. Yeah, but so then I guess you could also have a stripper. Why not?
But was there a stripper?
Oh, I don't know. I can't confirm that.
I think you're right, though. Studio 54 would have these performances and people would take their clothes off. But this just seemed like a fixture of the nightclub.
No, I agree. I always wondered about it too, but it adds to the flavor. I'll say that much.
And you see Tony's character chatting her up before she goes. So even she's probably slept with Tony. You know?
Yeah, there you go.
And she's very gorgeous. You know, the other thing. When I was younger and I watched Saturday Night Fever, the Annette character always seemed a little bit dowdy to me. Donna Pescow, who apparently put on like 20 pounds or 30 pounds for the role. But watching it again the other night, I found her really beautiful. I thought I really liked her character, and I think she gives a remarkable performance of vulnerability in the film. But she was very attractive. Caroline Gorney, I always liked her in the role. She had this sort of hard edge to her, but I thought she was terrific in it.
Yeah, the acting is great in general in this movie.
And apparently, Caroline Gorney had a bad car accident, and during the dance sequence, sometimes she couldn't keep up with Travolta, and it was concerning the studio. But I thought she dances great in it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known that just from watching the film.
They were filming in a real nightclub, but they had to bring in that flashing dance floor. I mean, that was production design. All the costumes are fantastic. I mean, Travolta's white suit has become iconic.
Did you hear, though, that all of the costumes were just clothes that they bought off the hangers and shelves of stores? There weren't any clothes that were specifically designed for the film.
Everybody dressed so appropriately for the film. And
yes.
There's nothing in that film. Well, it's not a period piece film because today it's a period piece, but they made it in 1977. Those were just the fashions of the day.
Correct.
It's interesting how even then fashion was important to, not even then, but fashion was important to Travolta and his crew.
Yes.
They cared about the way they looked because they were the faces. And Travolta he's always spending money on clothes.
That's right.
And I read a little bit of trivia talking about the opening title sequence. There's this, it's all Travolta because Travolta got a little bit upset when people said it was a body double at times for him strutting in the opening. But there's one scene where it's not Travolta, and it's the scene where he stops in front of the shoe store and he's looking at the shoe and he raises his leg like he's trying the shoe on. And Travolta was angry that they used a double for that because he said, my leg would have been steady. He said the guy doing it was wobbling.
Well, there you go.
I've never ever thought about that in my life. I always thought that was a cool little moment, but it's interesting how that was a pickup.
But it's interesting because there's an important lesson when it comes to the wardrobe of this film, which is that in the 20th century, every decade had its own distinct fashion styles, and they were very ostentatious in their differences. from decade to decade. So, for example, look at the 50s and compare it to the 1970s. Compare, for example, Rebel Without a Cause, which to some extent has similar themes to the themes in Saturday Night Fever. Look at how they're dressed in that movie and look at how they're dressed in Saturday Night Fever.
Well,
For the
what's
last
interesting,
30 years, we've had basically almost no major fashion trends. We're basically in this like culturally stagnant,
well,
I
they
don't
well
know, vacuum.
the 80s had this. I mean, people get the feels, because when they go, oh, the 80s look, but the 80s, and you ask me, the 80s fashions were hideous, especially the whole aerobics and the wearing the headbands and all that stuff. And of course,
Oh, I agree, but the thing
Travolta had
is,
that period when he did Perfect
yeah, and
with
the
Jamie Lee
70s
Curtis.
also, the 70s, even though I've come to appreciate the artifice of the clothes, let's say in Saturday Night Fever, they aren't as classy. I mean, that's the whole point. They're not as conservative as the clothes, let's say in the 1950s. See, the 1950s in some ways was the last sort of timeless classic style period because everything was more formal.
Yeah.
And so, for example, James Dean, if you look at a poster of him,
Well, he wears a
uh,
tie to school.
yeah, well, there you go. But my point is, everybody looks more formal, and that's sort of more
Yeah.
timeless in a way that let's say the polyester shirts in Saturday Night Fever aren't. But I still appreciate the artifice of them, and they look great in the
Well,
context of
Saturday Night, I
that
mean,
film.
the clothes in Saturday Night Fever definitely have this almost unique look
Yeah,
when
they
they're in the
do.
nightclub because
They
they all
do.
got these pointy collars. They're all in, I guess they're wearing like suits, but they're like kind of interesting because Travolta, the iconic suit from Travolta, the one that's on the poster is the white suit with the black shirt.
Yes,
And then when you think about Rebel Without a Cause, you think of James Dean's red jacket.
that's right.
Both movies, due to like their choices in fashion, have iconic, identifiable fashion moments
That's right.
where I'm not sure you can say that about that many contemporary movies. Like if
No,
I,
I can't think of the last time a contemporary movie set in contemporary times had an iconic wardrobe or an outfit that became iconic.
there have to be examples. I'm just my head is just not landing on them, but there were definitely more iconic wardrobe choices. I mean, we could
But
probably do a whole
would you
show
agree
on it.
though that
Yeah,
in general over the last let's say from the 1990s onward there have been no major or radically different clothing styles that are ubiquitous, meaning the world of Saturday Night Fever looks totally different than the world of Rebel Without a Cause.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if you think about it, many of the fashion styles of the 1990s are still here today. I mean, yeah, there's slight differences, but not really, not colossally different. You like if you watch someone, for example, in a high school movie that came out in the 1990s that took place in the 1990s and they're wearing, a hoodie or something, people are wearing that today.
yeah,
So what happened? Why is and my theory, there is no definitive answer, of course, to any of this, and it's all subjective anyway, so someone might not agree with my assessment about the lack of new clothing trends and styles. But I think that we now have all of our trends in cyberspace, in the digital realm, so that we don't actually pay enough attention to the tangible world. And by the way, if you look at a movie like Saturday Night Fever, you can really see the difference between living back then, which was all about being in the moment and just seeing the world around you and interacting with it, versus today, where people are just lost on their phone or in the world of their phone. I think it's very noticeable.
yeah. I mean, they had to go to the disco to have fun. I don't know.
That's right.
I don't know if that's going to be the same rights of behavior with the phone use today as what you would see in Saturday Night Fever. So yeah, I love Saturday Night Fever.
So do I.
Just to like close it out, I think it's a culturally important movie. It was selected for the Library of Congress. It was selected to be inducted into the Library of Congress, which shows that it was an impactful film. It definitely defined an era of film from fashion to music, turned John Travolta into probably the biggest star in the world at the time. And then he followed it up with Grease, and that doubled down on his fame. It's a really well-made film. It's got a terrific script. I would have no problem showing this movie to anybody who was 12 years old or more because I think it's fabulously entertaining. I think if you're uncomfortable in the sexual situations or the profanity or the racial slurs, you can use it as a case of saying, hey, this is how people talk that way. It's not appropriate today. But I don't find that there's anything about this movie that shouldn't be made today, but clearly it wouldn't be made today. So maybe you and I are going to have to make our own version of Saturday Night Fever at some point.
I think that's a
But
good idea.
yeah, and I mean, it's always been one of my favorite films. I know it's a favorite film of Josh Safdie, the filmmaker, and hopefully he'll listen to this podcast.
Yes. And Pulp Fiction, of course, couldn't exist without it in so many ways.
It really is an iconic film, and whether people have seen it or not, they've definitely heard about it, and they
That's right.
definitely seeing the Travolta in the disco move poster. I think they know what that is. But I enjoy it every time I see it. You know, even if there are a few maybe borderline cheesy moments, I dig the family dynamic. Just the scene at the
Oh, Don't Touch My Hair. That's a
dinner,
great moment.
yeah, at the dinner table. I never, you know, when I made the scene of running scared at the dinner table where the Joey like slaps his son because he said the word, I think it was fucking or whatever it was. I certainly didn't have Saturday Night Fever on the brain, but I think it was subconsciously in there, and I may have been channeling it when I think back about that. But the dinner table sequences, they're kind of sad because the father's lost his job and he feels like a loser, and that whole sense of despair is pervasive around everybody at the table. And then the grandmother, apparently the actress made the lines up herself because she wasn't supposed to say anything, and she wanted some kind of participation. So she goes, "Basta, basta, manja, manja."
Yes.
Those are great sequences. They're borderline comical, but they're also a little sad. And there's so much. It's such a huge meal. It's just this huge, delicious pizza of a meal. And I hope everybody who hasn't seen Saturday Night Fever will give it a chance.
Yes, it's definitely a great film. It's one of my favorites.
And that's about it. So we will be back with another Forbidden Movie podcast very soon.
That's right.
And by the way, the music that we're using is by the phenomenal composer John Murphy, and you can find it on his album Anonymous Rejected Film Score.
Until next time.